Hello, my name is Amy Anderson. I have been for many years the professor of Greek and New Testament at North Central University in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I'm also the director of the Center for Ancient Texts and Languages, which has as one of its outreach arms the Biblical Literacy Project. And this lecture is a biblical literacy project lecture. It's the first of a semester-long series on an introduction to exegesis. I will share my PowerPoint with you now so you can see some text here as I'm talking. I hope you decide to follow through the whole course. You can dip in and out if you like, but it's better to follow the lectures in order. This one will basically be telling you why you should become a lifelong student of the Bible and giving you some inspiration to get started. I would, as a preliminary statement, really strongly suggest to you that you use not electronic copies of the Bible, but hard copy. It will be much more effective in helping you to see entire pages with footnotes that fit into entire books, that fits into the entire scripture, and to gain proficiency in knowing where things are and finding them quickly. We may talk more about that in the future. I also suggest that you have multiple versions of the Bible. There will be a section later where we talk about which are the best to own, but I would very briefly here say probably a literal translation like the New American Standard, and it's good to have a King James Bible as well. There will be some very important comparisons that we make, and something like the New International Version, which is more of a dynamic equivalence version. But I will give you much more information later on that. I have a lecture in my Johannine literature course that comes after we have finished reading chapters 3 and 4. Chapter 3 is Nicodemus. Chapter 4 is the Samaritan woman. The author of the gospel, who we call John, has very deliberately placed these two stories in juxtaposition. In chapter 3, we have the respected Jewish leader who does not recognize who Jesus is and is puzzled about him. That's directly contrasted with the despised half-breed woman who figures Jesus out and responds quite quickly. John wants you to notice this difference. And the lecture I do after John 4 is about how a person can err in two extremes. You can, on the one hand, emphasize too much about what is happening now. That would be where the woman was standing. Jesus doesn't completely praise her. He shows that there are weaknesses. Or you can err by putting too much weight on tradition and past events. That's where Nicodemus is. Personal experience versus critical thought. What I will be saying later in the semester is that both of these are very important for our faith journey. Individual Christians vary in their tendencies to overdo one or the other of these aspects of faith, and so do entire denominations, cultures, or generations. Something that we could talk about would be, what is the tendency of your denomination? And I, as a Pentecostal, I would ask, what's the tendency of Pentecostals? Well, it probably, in general, is to equate what is happening here and now with God's presence or activity, which isn't wrong, but if that's the only thing I'm doing, then I'm making God little more than the sum total of my personal experience. It's a big mistake that Americans make as well. And this is exacerbated by the tendencies currently in our culture to focus on current events, celebrity culture, fads, very short term developments in theology that haven't stood the test of time, for example. A while back, I came across, now I have to figure out how to get my PowerPoint to move forward. There we go. I came across this advice on churchleaders.com, 7 recommendations for those studying to be a pastor. Take some business or leadership courses, build connections with pastors, volunteer in the church, work a secular job, take a people helping or counseling course, find a mentoring pastor, and embrace accountability. What's missing here? There isn't anything wrong with any particular item on this list. I would argue for all of these as being important, if not essential, in the training of a Christian leader. And I hope the person who wrote this list was just assuming that any pastor in training would also learn about the Bible. It's not on the list, you notice that? And how to pray, some other very important skills. I sure hope so. I hope that was assumed. The problem is that this whole list could apply equally to any leader of any secular organization. Just change the Christian words into business words. Everyone needs life skills to be able to manage people, to understand how to run an organization and to do finances. Just get rid of the Christianese and you could apply this list anywhere. And it was just a day or so later that I came across this quote by Matt Rawlings, who is the teaching pastor at Christ Community Church in Portsmouth, Ohio. He says, too many churches do in fact present a shallow faith that skips doctrine and apologetics for how-to sermons that are little more than self-help talks with scripture sprinkled over them. The refusal to learn theology and how to defend the faith, as well as to spend time thinking about how to present them in a clear and winsome manner, is at the heart of all of the valid objections by young people to the evangelical church. Pastors must simply take this responsibility seriously and put in the time and effort. There is no other answer. Now, this is better, but there's still something missing. Pastor Rawlings is emphasizing theology and apologetics, which are very important and which were not in the other list, but he is starting at the wrong place. And that it may help if I show you a diagram here in a simple picture that can show us what our goals are. You'll notice at the top of this pyramid is healthy theology and application, for which another word is hermeneutics. But the goal of exegesis is to form a biblical worldview, not a religious worldview, a biblical worldview. In other words, based on the book. Our faith should be based on the revelation of God, which is in the written record of his interaction with his people. So where does that happen on this pyramid? On the bottom 3 levels, which are so important. The biblical worldview will become the foundation for a healthy theology. If you take those one or more of those 3 layers out, you cannot build a healthy theology. And it won't, and even if someone teaches you good theology, it will not rest on a strong foundation. So that just like you could be taught healthy theology, you could be led astray because you don't know the foundation of your theology. The tendency of too many Christians is to begin at the top of the pyramid, to form a theology that fits their own worldview, and then to use proof texting to support their theology from the scripture. There's a great article in Relevant magazine called The Tragedy of Dumbing Down Christianity. And I strongly suggest that you Google that and have a look at it. It's not very long, and it will also say similar things to what I've just said. Now, I can't teach you the languages in this semester of exegesis. Either you already have them or you don't have them yet. But if you ever have a chance to learn either Greek or Hebrew, take advantage of that. I took Greek when I was a campus pastor at the University of Wisconsin River Falls. Back in those days, almost every public university offered the ancient languages. It's harder to find them now, but if we start asking for them, maybe some will also come back. I also suggest that for Greek and Hebrew that you take not 1 year, but 2 years of each, because 1 year basically gives you enough information to be dangerous. You need a second year to really solidify and understand how to use the language well. The other part of that foundational layer is Bible backgrounds. That would be taught in an Old Testament introduction and a New Testament introduction course. And then you can get more detail on Bible backgrounds as you take courses in various books of the Bible. Take as many of those as you can, whether you're doing them officially through a bachelor's or master's program, or whether you are learning on your own. The more Bible backgrounds and the more Bible literature you take, the better you will get at exegetical skills, which will then give you the foundation for a healthy theology. So this course, which I am offering through the Biblical Literacy Project, is meant to build on the foundational layer of backgrounds and languages and give you strength in that middle section, establishing the text and decent exegetical skills so that you can have your theology based on a truly biblical worldview. And this is not only about those of you who are preparing for pastoral ministry. Every Christian should be skilled at reading and interpreting the Bible. Think about that. Why would they not be? Why would a Christian not want to become good at handling Scripture? This is the book that our faith is based on. Why would a college-educated Christian not be able to handle Scripture at the college level? People have various levels of academic skills, but if you have a college education, you should be studying Bible at the college level. But not only that, as a future leader in the church, and you will, if you're listening to this lecture, you will be a leader of some sort. You also need to be able to pass on these skills to other people. Our faith is built on the discipleship model that every Christian takes other younger people and trains them in the things that he or she has understood. You should be planning to do that if you haven't started already. Here's a good question, and it sounds like I'm talking to pastors here, but I'll come back to that in a second. Are you providing a healthy foundation for your congregation? Here's questions you should ask of the church you're leading or will be leading, or the Bible study, or the home group, or even your own children. Are people in your church or Bible study able to evaluate whether appropriate connections are being made between Scripture and sermon on Sunday mornings? Can they tell if they're listening to fluff or if this is a Bible-based sermon? Is your church finding that healthy balance between current experience and critical thinking that we talked about with the Samaritan woman and Nicodemus? Is your church finding a healthy balance there? Do the members of the church know how to identify the best resources for studying Scripture? If they are at the mercy of a Google search to understand something in the Bible, then they're in trouble. because they don't know which places to trust and which not to. It's a scandal that the average Christian today is biblically illiterate. The church in America has failed the average Christian. Our people are starving for depth of teaching on the Bible and on historical backgrounds. If there is a church elder who has been a Christian for 20 years and he or she cannot properly exegete a passage because all that he or she has heard is 20 years of inspirational self-help sermons, then the leadership has failed that leader and that congregation. I'm fortunate at this point in my life to be in a church where I have a very excellent Bible preacher as the pastor of the church. His name is Craig Kruger. I found this quote from him while I was looking for something else, and I found that it really speaks into this. Here's a pastor who does teach his congregation how to use scripture correctly over time and through example. And you'll see that this was about a particular topic, but it's a good example for the whole Bible. He says, I don't avoid the hard parts. I usually teach them because, as the blog author implies, key insights into authorial intent and salvation history occur when we wrestle through the whole. So don't just go to your favorite passages. You need to study the whole thing. And then he adds, in fact, while being quizzed by the Duluth staff, this was a Chi Alpha group, on the homosexuality texts, I realized anew how a coherent Bible theology is crucial to holding a biblical view of sexuality. It helps give context to why and how the Old Testament texts are relevant to us. So there's a good example. So you should not be trying to do well in this course if you're taking it for credit, just to pass it, or just skim through it if you're not taking it for credit. You don't want even to just gain skills for yourself. You should be paying attention and gathering skills so that you can pass these on to someone else, including your own children someday. You don't want these skills just to keep them. You want them to help other people. Another great quote here by Frederick Schmidt. What I discovered as a graduate student and what I am regularly reminded of as a pastor, as a professor, is that education does not, sadly, occur by osmosis. It is tough and demanding. It requires time and attention. Most graduate schools of every kind, including seminaries, are trying to find ways to accommodate those needs. We're all busy. We all have stresses and pressures in our lives. The seminaries are trying to help you manage your education around those things. But the hard truth of it is that after all of those accommodations have been made, the student is still left with an inescapable choice. Am I prepared to make the sacrifices that are necessary to master this subject matter? And so I challenge you today, if you are taking this class for credit, or if you are taking it for personal growth, that you are willing to make the sacrifices to actually achieve the skills, not to just skim over them and say, oh yeah, that would be interesting to understand, but I don't have time. And so I place this before you today and encourage you to follow now in the rest of the course.